Pluribus just ended on the craziest cliffhanger. This turned into a horror show, and I feel like I need to rethink the entire way I've been watching the series. Big spoilers ahead. If you haven't watched episode 5 yet, bookmark this and come back. First off, this episode is such a feat in storytelling. There is one person on screen for 95% of the runtime, and it's still completely engaging. A lot of that is due to Ray Seahorn, who absolutely deserves an Emmy for this performance. She doesn't need any dialogue for you to know exactly what Carol is thinking and feeling. And the episode itself is so smart narratively. It pushes Carol emotionally to make her confront if she truly wants to be alone, and it serves a plot function. Carol could never have done this level of investigating with the hive mind still in town, so the isolation serves two functions. Can you imagine the whole world breaking up with you? Because that is essentially what happens to Carol. The hive mind clears out the entire town because they, quote, need a little space after her betrayal last week. And honestly, this shows the hive mind is a lot more nuanced than a lot of people assumed. They don't have to be happy all the time. They didn't smile at Carol once. Their friendliness comes from genuine affection because they hold affection for everybody, but now they're scared, hurt, and prioritizing self-preservation by not being physically around her. We find out from Lakshmi's phone call that Carol made the entire world cry, and I think they took that personally. They're very passive-aggressive. They won't speak to her directly. Carol has to leave messages to a voice recording. When they take out her trash or run errands for her, they send a drone. They don't want to be around her, and yet they still want to take care of her. Carol is trying so hard to act like this isn't bothering her, but she's clearly hurt. She can't believe the hive mind would go to such lengths to avoid her, the same way the hive mind can't believe Carol would go to such lengths to avoid joining them. Thematically, this episode explores loneliness. The show keeps circling this idea of be careful what you wish for. Carol took her trips with Helen, her career, and even the hive mind for granted, and now realizes she might miss them even though she didn't want them around. Being completely alone, Carol does some detective work this episode. Congratulations to all the people that pointed out the milk details last week. When she takes out her trash, she notices the recycling bin is filled only with cartons of milk. There are no other food containers of any sort. This leads her to the dairy manufacturer, where she finds a strange amber liquid leaking from the equipment and bags of powder that crows are pecking at. That is key. I will return to that. She explains that all the milk cartons contain a mixture of water and this mysterious powder. It has a neutral pH, no smell, and it's a bit thinner than olive oil. After some grocery store sleuthing, she tracks down the facility where the powder is made, and when she gets into cold storage, there are what look like body bags right next to the produce. We did see them collecting all those bodies in the first 2 episodes. So I guess the implication is that the powder is crushed up people? Because remember the crows? The crows were pecking at the powder, and crows are scavengers. They eat dead animals of any kind. And the show clearly wants us to connect that to the wolves digging at Helen's grave earlier in the episode. Both scenes tie back to human remains and animals finding them now that there's no people. Remember back when they asked, are you vegetarian? Zosha said that would be our preference, yes. Is it only a preference because they're drinking people? And I think heating up minerals like calcium could cause the substance to oxidize, producing that amber color. Someone with chemistry knowledge weigh in here. But the main question is, why do they need to drink this? Carol wonders earlier if this is how they stay connected, but now I'm wondering, has the virus changed them biologically? Are they even fully human anymore? Because even though they did eat normal lunch food in episode 2, the recycling bin being only milk cartons means this is all they're consuming. Is there some nutrient or mineral only found in humans that they need to survive now? And my other question is, if they need these bodies to survive, what would they have done if the chemtrail disaster didn't happen? Because originally they were going to spread this virus non-violently, in which there wouldn't be any bodies. A couple of other little tidbits from this episode. Carol did send videotapes to all of these survivors tracking her investigation, so I hope she can get in contact with Minosos next week. And I have to shout out the cinematography of this episode. This sunset shot was so gorgeous, and they just chose all of the coolest angles for the most mundane tasks. They really worked to keep this one-person episode very visually interesting. Please drop your theories for this episode. I am still processing. I have so many questions. We need to pool together our resources here to figure out what's going on. So drop your comments and give me a follow for more weekly recaps and Pluribus content. We finally got the answer to last week's cliffhanger on Pluribus, and somehow it was both expected and kind of unexpected. We learned a lot in this week's episode, and it really plants the seeds for where things are going. Spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen episode 6, bookmark and come back. What did Carol find in the storage facility? It was in fact dead bodies, but they were chopped up and vacuum sealed, which is why she had that delayed reaction. And there is a meat grinder in the back. I know some people will say it was too obvious obvious, but doing some random twist out of nowhere just to shock us wouldn't make sense. We all correctly guessed because the show set it up that way so that we could naturally come to that conclusion. That's good writing. Carol takes video to send to the other survivors, but because it's such important information, she drives to Vegas to give it to Mr. Diabate directly. He is currently forcing the hive mind to act out his fantasy of being this debonair master poker player surrounded by women obsessed with pleasing him. People can be hard on Carol, but he's absolutely wasting more resources and using these people in a much worse way. The hive mind is still ignoring Carol, so she does not get to have a fun time partying in Vegas. They have cleared the whole casino by the time she gets there. She is ready to shock Mr. Diabate with her discovery, but he already knows. The individual who used to be John Cena told him. Diabate plays a video for Carol where John Cena explains that they're drinking people because they're in a food shortage crisis because they can't even kill plants. They can't farm, they can't pick an apple off a tree, they have to utilize all the food sources they possibly can. And Kumba, Mr. Diabate, points out what I did last week, that they said their preference was to be vegetarian, not that they were. They are sneaky with their language, remember that. Kumba also tells her that these survivors have been trying to solve the starvation crisis, suggesting things like robotic farming. I think Carol may feel a little guilty about accusing them of not wanting to save humanity, but I think Carol is right that turning them back is the only long-term solution. Humanity will not survive if you can't even farm normally. I think the show is landing on this idea that life cannot be 100% peaceful. Pain and conflict are part of being human. If you avoid harming anything, including plants, you end up harming yourself. Think about it. They are wasting precious resources on these survivors because they can't tell them no. Then Kumba informs her that all of the other survivors have been hanging out without her. They Zoom twice a week, they meet up, and they purposefully voted not to include her. Ray Seahorn's performance here is so gut-wrenching as she's trying to hold back tears and then immediately has to go to the bathroom to cry. This shows how much she doesn't want to be alone. She is aching for human connection, and being rejected by the entire world is devastating. The next morning, we see in real time how Carol puts on this mask, covering up her vulnerability behind a wall of indifference and toughness. She suggests her and Kumba meet up later in the day to talk, but the minute she can tell he's uncomfortable, she immediately backtracks and says she was joking. She looks pained as she says it because she's so lonely and didn't even get 24 hours of human interaction. And we get to the stem cell twist. Carol says we're gonna starve too if we're forced into the hive mind, but Kumba reveals that they do need their consent to turn them. The virus has to be tailored to each person's stem cells, and because the process to get them is painful and invasive, they have to get permission because they can't harm anything. But remember, Carol froze her eggs. I knew this would come into play. If they can get the stem cells a different way, like her eggs, then permission does not apply. And when Carol doesn't consent, they respond with, no stem cells will be collected from your body. See, they are sneaky with their language, just like with the vegetarian line. I was screaming at the screen, you gotta cover your bases, you gotta think like a lawyer. Better call Saul, better call Kim Wexler. When Carol leaves, Kumba tells her the world misses you, Zosha misses you, they're just looking for a change of heart. Carol is not having it, but I think down the line, the show will explore the idea of someone who rejects the world falling in love with the world via Zosha. Then we end in Paraguay with Manosos, who watches the video Carol sent last week, sharing that there is a way to reverse this, and he has such relief on his face. You can tell he's been waiting so long to hear those words. His performance with no dialogue here was really incredible, and it's a beautiful reframe of the videotape scene. People were mocking her delivery, saying it wouldn't convince anyone, and yet it's what one person needed to hear. My mind immediately went back to Carol's conversation with Helen in the first episode. Helen said, if you make one person happy, maybe that's not art, but it's something. Carol's words didn't resonate with most people, but they resonated with one, and that matters. Manosos has the same viewpoint as Carol. We see him interact with his mother, who's part of the hive, and when she calls him son, he's like, you're not my mother, she was mean. And that's Carol's entire point. Someone's flaws make up who they are. You take that away, and that's not them. And he's off in his car to find her somehow. Overall, this episode is really good if you're emotionally locked into Carol's journey and tapped into the show's themes. When you break it down, we learned a lot, and many moments here are setting up for future payoff. Let me know your thoughts on this episode, and give me a follow for weekly recaps and more Pluribus content. Carol and Manosos went through it this week on Pluribus. This was a very trying, emotional episode that pushed them both to the brink. Manosos physically and Carol emotionally. Spoilers ahead if you haven't watched episode 7. Let's start off with Carol. At the start of this episode, which is 12 days since the virus hit, Carol is perhaps a little inspired by Mr. Diabate to enjoy her life as best she can. But unlike his elaborate fantasies, she wants to enjoy very normal things in life. An ice-cold Gatorade, scratching lottery tickets, golfing at the country club, setting off fireworks. But as she does all these things, she is constantly singing aloud to herself because she's literally trying to drown out the sound of her loneliness. The silence is really bothering her already, and the hive mind hasn't even been gone that long yet. can't. And she starts to bend some rules that she wouldn't have before. She lets the hive mind cook fancy meals for her that were once important to her and Helen, even though she had once told them never to think about her. So this is indicating that she's starting to accept the situation a bit versus fighting against it. And then we fast forward 12 days to 48 days later, and Carol is not doing well mentally or emotionally. We get another fireworks scene, but this one is starkly different than the one we saw earlier in the episode where she was actually getting enjoyment out of it. Now she looks totally numb as she sets them off, like she's just going through the motions. And we see just how depressed and at the end of her rope she is because one of the fireworks falls over and is aimed right at her, ready to fire off, and she just stares it down, literally not caring if it hits her or not. She barely reacts as it just whizzes past her head. She is done with life, basically. And it's very telling that it's right after this scene that she begs the hive mind to come back. She gets some paint and literally writes that in big letters on her driveway. While she's waiting, she stares at the Georgia O'Keeffe painting on her wall called Belladonna, which is of a deadly nightshade, something beautiful but deadly, not unlike Zosha. She won't kill Carol literally, but in a different sense, she will. When Zosha arrives, Carol is hesitant at first because it's been so long since she's seen another person, but then she immediately collapses and sobs into her arms and is clutching her like she's going to disappear again. It's a really powerful moment. There's such relief and desperation for human touch and connection. And yet, there's this sort of sinister layer bubbling underneath. Carol was brought to heal and essentially forced into accepting and embracing something that she didn't want in the first place. It feels a bit like a tactic used in an abusive relationship, utilizing the silent treatment. When the hive mind said we need our space, it wasn't really we'll come back when we're ready. It was you need to beg us to come back and then we will. It's like they had to break her spirit so she wouldn't harm them anymore. So as happy as I am to have Zosha back on my screen, I genuinely love the Zosha-Carol relationship. It's such a fascinating dynamic to explore. I love their chemistry. It does have a slightly icky feeling to it. Now let's visit Manosos. He is driving by car to make the trip from Paraguay to New Mexico. He is much more extreme than Carol in his visceral distaste for the hive. He does not want their help at all when they offer to drive him, give him water. He wants to rough it out. He's sleeping in churches, not hotels. He's eating canned food, and he always leaves money whenever he takes anything. So he's really operating like these people are going to come back and he will not take advantage of them. He's also trying to learn some English from a language tape so he can communicate with Carol. He hits an issue when he reaches the Darien Gap, which is over 60 miles of dangerous jungle terrain between Panama and Colombia, and the hive mind is begging him not to go. They tell him there's no clean water, no marked trails, there's poisonous insects and snakes, and there are chunga palm trees that have these long spines covered in bacteria that lead to fatal infection from even a minor cut. And yet Manosos is determined not to accept their help. We learn that he basically doesn't view them as human right now. He says nothing on this planet is yours, all that you have is stolen, you don't belong here. So more extreme than Carol. Carol still views them as human. He makes his best effort in the jungle, but he trips and gets stabbed in the back by those chunga palms, which looks horrifically painful. He collapses and the hive mind comes to rescue him in a helicopter, which I think would be against his wishes. I think he'd rather die than accept the hive mind's help. And it's the opposite of Carol, who decided she'd rather live and accept the hive mind's help than die. So both were pushed to eventually have to accept the hive mind's help, but in different ways. It's interesting that a poisonous plant is what pushed them both toward the hive mind. Manosos literally with the chunga palm, but remember, Carol was staring at the painting of the poisonous nightshade right after she asked the hive to come back. In terms of what could happen next, I think Manosos might be arriving at a bad time where he could be at odds with Carol, because Carol might be shacked up with Zosha when he gets there, and maybe less willing to work against them after the trying experience she just went through. The finale is called The Girl or the World, but it's written in Spanish as La Chica o el Mundo, which sounds like something Manosos could say to Carol. And then maybe she has to make a choice. We'll see. I'm excited for these last two episodes. I can't believe we're almost at the end here. Let me know your thoughts on the episode, what you think will happen next, and give me a follow for weekly recaps and more Pluribus content. Best episode yet. Pluribus has given us one of the most fascinating, complex, juicy relationships on television, and I'm obsessed. If you invested in Zosha Carol stocks back in episode 2, it is paying off now. Spoilers ahead for episode 8. If you haven't watched, bookmark and come back. The big headline for this episode is that Zosha and Carol have crossed the threshold into a romantic relationship. This entire episode is dedicated to building their connection, and they spend it going on different dates essentially. Playing cards, getting a couples massage. Off the bat, after their reunion last week, Zosha is approaching Carol differently. She laughs at her more sarcastic jokes and teases her because she's learning what she responds to. Carol says, "Are you letting me win, or do you just suck at this when they're playing cards?" And Zosha throws it back in her face when they're playing croquet later. And Zosha's like, "Maybe you just suck." That is so different from how we've seen the Hive interact with her thus far. They really are emotionally intelligent. Carol takes notes on all the things she learns about the Hive, but I find it notable she only starts doing this after a vulnerable moment with her. After their first date, let's say, Zosha's like, "We had a wonderful time with you." And Carol very earnestly says, "I had a nice time too." And that's when she struts to her whiteboard and writes down, "They eat people." It feels like a reminder to herself that Zosha's part of the Hive, because I think she's scared of what she's already starting to feel. Carol nicely summarizes what we do learn about them. Everyone sleeps communally to save energy. The Hive communicates via the body's electric charge. I think that will be key to reversing the situation. Carol asks Zosha what it really feels like to be in the Hive. Individually, they feel sensations, but are aware of what's going on with everyone else. Zosha can still enjoy her massage, even though she's giving it to herself and Carol. And when stargazing together, we learn that the Hive is building a giant antenna to send their Hive signal to space. The next day is really the turning point here. Carol lies to the Hive that she's writing Waikaro again, and they are so excited to have something new to read, because as a collective, they've read every single book in existence, but they also benefit from encouraging this. The Hive fully rebuilds the burnt down diner that Carol first wrote Waikaro in as a special gift, which is a very romantic gesture in my book, and Carol loves it. She looks so happy reminiscing on where her journey started. This place was her escape to do what she loved when she was struggling to make money. Then she suddenly freaks out and runs back home, and this next scene is where all of her confusing feelings come to a head. They get honest with each other. Carol acknowledges that she knows what they're doing. They're encouraging her to write to distract her from her world-saving mission. And Zosha says, "Yeah, we do wish you would stop, but it's also true that we love Waikaro." And this is where I think we all need to be able to hold multiple truths in our head. They're happy if Carol's distracted, but they do also feel genuine love because that's what they're programmed to do. I don't think it's wholly manipulative. And Carol is clearly struggling to reconcile her feelings for Zosha with her duty to save the world. She says she likes her, but she can't accept the Hive because their world is unsustainable if they can't even pick an apple off a tree. But she's scared to go against them again after her traumatizing period of isolation. And then very interestingly, Zosha initiates their first kiss. On one level, I think it's her saying, "No, we won't leave you again." But on the other, I think she sees Carol's internal struggle and is giving her permission to lean into what she's truly aching for. Because ultimately, she's right as to what would make Carol happy. I have never seen Carol happier on this show than the morning after her night with Zosha when she's geeking out with her over the new chapter of Waikaro she wrote. I think the fact that she starts writing right after being with Zosha is a sign that she is actively making the choice to let herself be happy for once, even though she knows she's giving the Hive what they want. Because she's never allowed herself to do that most of her life. In this new chapter, Carol writes Raban as a woman, and she is absolutely giddy sharing how she would make this happen canonically. Because as I've said before, Carol has never hated her work. It was always an extension of her self-loathing, punching down on herself before anyone else could. But now in this judgment-free world, she can be proud of what she's created and be herself for the first time. I found this part really moving and kind of beautiful. And Zosha, in turn, is loving this new sense of discovery and trying to guess what happens next in her book. The Hive is starved for new experiences, but Carol provides wonder and excitement through her art. They also love learning about Carol herself. There are new details they learn that she never told anybody before, like that she loves the sound of train whistles. What's sad is that the Hive mind gets more from Carol when she's outside of the Hive, but because of their biological imperative, they'll lose their newfound sense of joy when they pull her in. We jump ahead 12 days, and Carol and Zosha are very domestic, cooking together. Throughout the episode, Carol had been trying to get Zosha to use I pronouns, and in this scene, she's using them a lot more comfortably because Carol is desperate to see her as an individual. She wants to know more about the real Zosha. So Zosha shares a story from her childhood in Poland where a man would give her free ice cream bars because she didn't have any money and her favorite flavor was mango. She also talks about how much she loved the giant ships, and Carol writes about pirate ships. So that's a possible connection between Carol and the real Zosha if we ever meet her. Suddenly, Zosha looks disturbed, and Carol's fantasy life she's built is about to be shattered. Manusos escapes the hospital, and he is now crossing the border on his way to Carol. I have a finale theory based on the phrase Manusos was repeating last week. The girl saves the mouse from the trap. I think Zosha's the mouse because the virus originated with a mouse, and Carol will release her from the hive mind, because that would be a real sacrifice from her, giving up the Zosha that she's found comfort with. Anyways, I loved this episode. This was my favorite by far. Let me know your thoughts, your finale predictions, and give me a follow for more weekly recaps and Pluribus content.